Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session of FPCI-Huawei Digital Conference, a conversation with His Excellency Satvinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Economic Community, and this session is titled Charting a Path Towards an Ideal ASEAN Economic Community. This session will be moderated by FPCI Chairman Dr. Dino Djalal.
Good morning, everybody, and this is Dino Djalal. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our FPCI-Huawei conference, and today we have the pleasure of welcoming and having the conversation with Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Economic Community. Welcome, Pak Satvinder Singh. Pak Sat, it's really nice to have you here. Pak Sat is from Singapore, and he just took up his position in April this year. That's correct, yeah. So thank you for speaking with us. And let me just begin with a couple of questions, Pak Satvinder. ASEAN has implemented numerous initiatives, roadmaps, and agreements to realize the ASEAN Economic Community. Until today, how have the plan and initiatives succeeded in supporting the realization of ASEAN Economic Community?
Thank you, Patti. I'm extremely delighted to be here with all of you, though virtually. Thank you for giving the opportunity for the ASEAN Secretariat to have this conversation with all of you, the participants and the audience. Definitely on the issue on the initiatives. Of course, the main goal of ASEAN on the economic side is really the realization of the ASEAN Economic Community. And for some of you who may or may not be aware, for the ASEAN community, the ASEAN Economic Community is basically the vision to develop an integrated and highly cohesive economic region for all of us, the 10 countries, where the hope is that everything ranging from goods, services, investment, even capital, and even skilled labor can move seamlessly throughout our region. And I think the vision is that as we can design and we can work towards building this ASEAN Economic Community to properly function as a single market, a single production base for all our consumers and all of our companies. Of course, deeply ensuring that we remain competitive globally and we become relevant in the global supply chain. And what I can say, Pat, is that in the last 5 years, as you know, we are guided by the ASEAN Blueprint 2025 plan. We have actually, this year itself, we reached the halfway mark of the Blueprint plan. This plan is basically charting out the path towards this vision of the ASEAN Economic Community. As in the middle of the year when I arrived, we were taking stock of where we are as a region, and we went across all the sectors to get a full report. And the good news is that even though the last 2 years, the region has been impacted by the pandemic, as you all know, that has impacted all our lives, not just economically, but socially and the livelihoods of our people. But the good thing is that when we were doing a stock take of where we are under the Blueprint plan, more than 55% of all the initiatives that's supposed to be completed by 2025, we have already achieved that middle of this year. Another good news is that, in fact, another close to about 35% of initiatives are in progression, meaning to say they will be in progression. And there are, of course, the rest, about 10, 15, 20% are initiatives that we still have now till the next 5 years in order to fully get them working. So basically, just let me give you a bit of the sort of a sense of what are some of the things we've been able to achieve, the significant ones. I think first things, when it comes to trade in goods, today we've already achieved like 99.3%, removed all 99.3% of all tariffs amongst all the ASEAN member countries. And then in terms of trade facilitation, I think we've been quite successful already. We have connected digitally under the ASEAN single window all 10 countries. So we are already beginning to exchange very significant government, customs, trade facilitation documents cross borders amongst member countries. We've also created the non-tariff measures toolkits. We have also launched our ASEAN Customs Transit System, where we are trying to do seamless flow, where one single document and one single system of delivery in terms of truck can actually come through more than pass through a couple of countries efficiently. What I can say is that overall, when it comes to trade, all of these measures that we have taken the last 5 years and even before that, they have definitely resulted in intra-ASEAN trade increases. As you know, today, trade has increased intra-ASEAN from like 535 billion in 2015. Today, trade stands around 633 billion. Okay, and out of this 633 billion today, 22.5% of this trade is basically trade that happens within ASEAN. So what I'm trying to say that even when the volume has increased so much, our percentage is still rising. So it clearly shows you that ASEAN is doing the right things in terms of integration. I think more importantly, besides trade, we cannot forget services sector. I think this is where, again, services sector is about 50% of our GDP of ASEAN. And of all the 10 packages of commitments of market access that have been made under the ASEAN Trade and Services Agreement, ATISA, since 1996, again, I can clearly say that in terms of services have grown very significantly, where in 2005 it stood around 112 billion US dollars. Today, services size is almost about 500 billion. So, and average growth are really, it's very, very healthy. But I think more importantly is the services sector has also been a very large contributor to foreign direct investments in our region. In fact, 60% of the total FDI in our region is from services. And I think this is, again, brings me to the third area, which is investments. Clearly, when you look at what we have done, the ASEAN leaders have come together and they've also adopted ACIA, the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement. What we can assure you is that we have come together to adopt a negative approach in making liberalization commitments. That has created predictability, transparency for investors, and as a result, FDI inflow in our region is very healthy. I think other than China, we are today still, despite the pandemic, one of the largest recipients of FDI in the world. In fact, even amidst problems that we faced in 2020, we still received 137 billion US dollars in FDI in our region. And I think this trend is growing, is still going to be in the same path. And I think moving forward, overall, one of the most important strategies under our ASEAN Economic Community is really about global ASEAN strategy. Essentially, to commit towards not only integration, but to connect ASEAN to the rest of the world. And I think what better example you can see from how the leaders came together, even in November last year, where the rest of the world is really erecting barriers and protectionism. Instead, the ASEAN leaders came together with their 5 important trading partners and they signed the RCEP agreement. So to me, all these foundations laid down that are truly parting the way for us to achieve our vision as set under the ASEAN Economic Blueprint 2025.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really remarkable and refreshing to hear. ASEAN continues to move with great speed in this economic progress. But Sat, you mentioned about the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025. Certainly, that is the foundation of ASEAN's integration and growth. But it has also been criticized for being one-dimensional and overly trade-centric. How do you respond to these critics in regard to economic collaboration with the private sector?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I mean, while trade is an extremely important part of the ASEAN Economic Blueprint, but I do feel that indeed the foundation of the ASEAN Economic Community pillar builds on many more elements. And if you study carefully, the blueprint actually has about 5 major elements. And only one element actually is dedicated very deeply into trade. And that's connected to the highly integrated cohesive economy. Now, the other The other elements actually are more focused on, for example, improving the region's competitiveness and productivity. And this space, I think a lot of the effort is into planning for intellectual property development, good governance in the region. Then there are other elements. For example, there's a huge focus on sectoral development. So not so much on trade, but sectoral development. And the focus into is sectors like energy, tourism, ICT sectors. And then there's also a critical element of inclusivity. I think this is important, where the plans in the AC clearly chart out initiatives that deeply center on engagement with key stakeholders, including the MSMEs, including the informal sectors. And lastly, I think there's also a very deep focus on not on trade, but more in terms of active engagement on the global economy, our connectivity. So not centered on trade alone, but beyond trade. So what I want to say is that I think the scope is actually quite significantly large. Maybe out there, we sometimes when we are sharing and when we are reporting, too much of the focus is on trade, but there are so many elements of the blueprint and it's very comprehensive.
Okay. But Sat, ASEAN obviously is not EU, it functions differently. And on the ASEAN Economic Blueprint 2025, you have ambitious goals and it has to be followed by the 10 economies of ASEAN. How do you make sure that everyone moves at the same speed? Because, obviously that's going to be a great challenge. So how does it happen? Right.
So for us, there is a very sensitive, though as a region, we are together, there's centrality of ASEAN, but for almost all initiatives, there is a very deep focus and a sense of inclusiveness and capacity, and the need for capacity building for some member states that require it. And you clearly see that in almost all discussions, whether we are now looking at digitalization of the region and efforts to help in the digitalization. There's clearly, I think, while certain countries are leading the efforts and they have resources to move quicker, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, and even Indonesia, but definitely some of the CLMV countries, they definitely need a lot more help in capacity building, both in soft and hard infrastructure. And clearly, we have deep initiatives, sub-regional groupings, and efforts being made under the sub-regional groupings in order for the CLMV countries to be able to catch up, and to be able to move quicker in these spaces. I sometimes feel some of the new things that we are doing, especially in digitalization, right? I think this is a space where actually some of the CLMV countries, they probably have capacity to move even quicker because they are not sitting on legacy systems. They are not going to be hampered by legacy infrastructure. They are really going to move from day one into smart cloud infrastructure. While the rest of the more developed ASEAN countries, they have legacy problems where they have to deal with. And the movement towards really strong digitalization actually may be a little bit more costlier as they work towards integration of the old technology with the new technology. So I think overall we're on the right path. I think there's sensitivity in all of our initiatives. There's inclusiveness among members, and we always in ASEAN do the ASEAN way, which is never leave anyone behind. Yes. And I think that spirit has been guiding us, and that's been the one that's been responsible in bringing us the success across the whole region. I mean, if it's not for the pandemic, I think we'll be a lot more confident in our growth and development, but definitely the last 2 years have been tough. But I think we still have that ability to be sensitive and to be inclusive. I think that spirit is alive and well in ASEAN.
Yeah, and I think that's a good principle because, compared to other regions, I think ASEAN is the one region that places most premium on the concept of inclusivity, right? We've mentioned it for the Indo-Pacific as well, and all other regional design. So kudos to ASEAN for that. And you mentioned about the digital, and obviously the digital economy now is king or prince, whatever you call it. And there's the ASEAN Digital Master Plan, the ADMP, and it will enter its first year since its launch in January 2021. Can you update us on the progress of this ADMP and what are the challenges and prospects of the plan?
Yes, the ASEAN Digital Master Plan, we call it the ADMP, Digital Master Plan. It's really a kind of a very ambitious vision by the region to build ASEAN as a leading digital community and economic bloc. And of course, to be powered by a very secure and transformative digital services, a technology, and a whole set of ecosystem that we are planning. It actually came into enforcement. This agreement, this master plan came into enforcement in January 2021 this year. And all of us in the region are beginning to align our resources, including external support from our partners, towards trying to achieve our goals, towards trying to implement some of the key things that we need to lay out and roll out in order to achieve this plan. And I must say that some of the major focus things that we have already developed includes things like things like data governance rules, digital innovation, online trust systems, sustainable development, touching on cybersecurity solutions that the region needs, and also addressing things like digital divide. So it's really, really comprehensive. And I'm not going to go into details of it because it'll take me a separate event to talk about it. But definitely, the agenda is very ambitious. And I must say that besides this overall big master plan transformation, we are going to be looking very carefully into digital connectivity, into data governance, into digital inclusion, definitely on cybersecurity. And at the same time, we have to address sustainability in order to create this enabling environment for the whole regional digital ecosystem development and resilience. I must say that this year itself, you can see the deep commitment at the Leaders Summit that took place last month in October. The leaders actually came forth and they also endorsed a very critical, what I call it is a digital prioritization plan. It's called the Bandar Sri Begawan Roadmap, BSBR. Now, this BSBR is of course a subset of what the ASEAN Digital Master Plan is. It's a subset, but in this Bandar Sri Begawan Roadmap, it actually prioritizes all the important things that we need to deliver from now to 2025 in order to jumpstart digitalization in our region. And this includes, for example, things like the resumption of safe and orderly movement of goods and people through e-commerce, simplifying processes in the use of IT applications, the promotion of access to things like trust, how do you have trusted digital documents passing through the value chain of trade. Also, it touches on things like protection of IPR, it touches on cybersecurity and other things. But I think the most important thing that came out from BSBR was a commitment by the ASEAN leaders for the first time to have for our region our own ASEAN Digital Economic Framework, our own kind of a DIFA. And the leaders actually this year committed that we are going to start a negotiation of a DIFA before 2025. But my sense is that because all the stakeholders are aligned, and this is something we want to do, most likely than not, the negotiation of a digital agreement for ASEAN will happen way before 2025.
Okay. Let me ask you a question on US-China competition. We know this is the new sector or area of the geopolitical competition between the great powers. And many say that decoupling is more tangible in the technology sector, particularly on the 5G technology. What is your opinion on this?
For me, Patti, I think for all of us, when you talk to inside of ASEAN and our stakeholders, I think in any of our conversations, you will see a very consistent trend. The trend is that ASEAN is not going to be able to take sides. We are going to be able to engage all of our major stakeholding partners, and this includes both the United States and China. And to me, I think on any decision that we are going to make in terms of what sort of technologies or infrastructure we need to be connected to, I think the most important thing is that we want to decide that it has to be infrastructure that's interoperable to all the various major partners in the world. So whether it's going to be a 5G network that's connected to China or an equivalence of a 5G network that's going to connect to Europe or US, I think the most important thing is we want to be interoperable to the entire region. I think this is what even our partners want. I think the Chinese and the US also look to us as important, relevant global supply chain marketplace, and they definitely want to take advantage of the benefits that we can offer as a region to support their needs. And we act as that very important interconnected region to region role. And I think that role cannot be compromised. And this is why the decision on what technology to use is not an easy one. But one thing is clear, we are not going to take sides. It has to be something which is going to be neutral and is going to help us to be connected and interoperable with all our partners.
Pak Sat, this is FPCI-Huawei conference, and I'm aware that Huawei has established the Huawei ASEAN Academy in Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Indonesia to help ASEAN countries develop digital talent. And they also have worked with ASEAN Foundation for the ASEAN Seeds for Future program. How do you see the importance of the private sector, particularly technology companies, in helping ASEAN meet its ASEAN Economic Community 2025?
Patti, the importance of having important private sector players like Huawei in our region participating and playing quite a very important role, working hand in hand with, I think, institutions like ASEAN, with ASEAN policy makers like yourself. I think it's a very critical role, and in terms of being able to support us as our region embraces the need to move towards the fourth industrial revolution. And I think this is a space where, again, it's not just the governments. I think this is where the private sector in Asia will have a very deep role in being able to work with us hand in hand to roll out the capacities that we need to build, the knowledge we need to bring forward, the connectivity we need to create. And I think all of that, you can see that in the region, we are extremely appreciative of what Huawei ASEAN Academy has done, and especially its collaboration with the ASEAN Foundation for the project called the ASEAN Seeds for the Future program. I think we deeply appreciate that, and we truly hope that the Huawei ASEAN Academy, the focus can further be expanded with the rest of the ASEAN member states, because today I think you're not touching on all the member states. This is where we truly hope in the next couple of years we can expand to embrace all the 10 ASEAN member states. But I think today the focus is really addressing a lot of the young talent that's coming into the marketplace. But I think the next phase, all of us, the colleagues in ASEAN, one of our deep hope is that some of the programs that Huawei is working on is not just going to be focusing on young talent, but also be focusing on some of the, what I call, some of the reskilling of our existing workers. Let me just share a little bit of light in that. I think one of the biggest impediments the region has is truly about we are lacking the human capital that's needed in the digital transformation. And the SMEs, all of us are competing against the largest companies in ASEAN. In fact, you can call in onto the demand numbers. Every single capital city of ASEAN, there's a shortage of technology capital. And I think this is where you're not going to solve the problem by just looking out for this capital to come in. I think this is where there may be a very important need to reskill existing white-collar workers so that they can, it's not about them becoming programmers, but it's more about giving them the skill set so that they can start to manage digital transformation projects in their organizations and then drive all this transformation for their companies and for their other employees. I think we're looking for programs like that. And I think this is where we believe that the private sector can definitely come in together with, for example, with ASEAN. We could together create some of this capacity building for the entire region and try to narrow some of these human capital gaps. And I think it's very critical to address that in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Sad, I'm going to take some questions from the viewers. We have a question from Ismail Yusod from Malaysia. How is the US-China trade war impacted on ASEAN Economic Community? Yeah.
At this stage, it's too soon to tell, but I can assure you that naturally, whenever there are sanctions globally, especially between important trading partners, the fallout is normally not just felt by the bilateral partners that are doing sanctions against each other. I think the fallout, especially of such large trading partners, will be felt by all economies. And I think, notwithstanding that, I don't have specific numbers, but scientific numbers, but definitely the potential growth for the region obviously was affected. But again, it's because of the pandemic, it's so difficult to tell how much of it is because of the pandemic and how much pandemic disruption and how much of it was because of prior to the pandemic, some of the sanctions that started taking place between the US and China. But I think notwithstanding that, I also see opportunities for us, and clearly the coming of RCEP taking place on the 1st of January next year, I think businesses can look forward towards having a much strengthened position in ASEAN, being connected to some of the major economies like Japan, China, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. I feel that even the European companies, the American companies today, they all are truly reconfiguring some of their decisions on how they're going to plan their global supply chain in Asia. Because in the past, I think the focus, as you all know, a lot of focus was always on China, right? But I think today, many of them have really moved in the last 1-2 years in preparation that it has to be a different strategy today in Asia. I think most of them are looking at China +1, China +2 alternatives. And you'll see it's not just the ASEAN countries, even some of the South Asian economies are beginning to benefit from new investments coming in, new global supply chains now looking at us in a much more serious way. And this is where I was in the beginning of my interview, I'm quite confident that when it comes to FDI, fresh FDI, true good quality FDI, I think we're going to see some of that rolling into our region in the next couple of years. And obviously, we have the leaders in ASEAN have developed and provided for many reasons, I think, with coming together of the RCEP agreement. I think that leadership, that message to the world that we are ready to provide relevancy and we are ready competitively to provide that support on the needs of the global supply chain, I think that's a very clear message the world has seen.
Okay. We have a question from Min in Vietnam. RCEP will start next year, and now Thailand also sees the possibility to be part of CPTPP. How do you see the existence of the two big trade groups whereby some ASEAN countries are part of both agreements? By the way, this is going to be our last question because time is pressing, but please, fireside.
So, I will say this. I think having RCEP alongside the CTPP, many of our ASEAN member states are now also members of CTPP, some of the large ones. But obviously, the CTPP obligations, some of it are slightly deeper, and it does cover areas that the RCEP doesn't cover. And typically, it's more into areas like labor, environment, competition. Not that RCEP doesn't cover it, but I think the level of commitments required by members who are part of CTPP is a lot higher and deeper, and the obligations are higher. My sense is that RCEP is a very good step forward for the entire region, and it's not like RCEP is going to be static, right? Because like any other agreement, once an agreement comes into force, there are always reviews that take place at various junctures. So in my mind, I think things that today are getting more and more important, like environment, labor, gender issues, competition. All this will continue to be important part, including even sustainability. They'll be important part of future agreements. So to me, I think the first commitment is that looks like we have sunk all the 10 countries have sunk our commitment towards RCEP, and we are on the right path towards being able to move forward in some of these new areas. So to me, it's complementary. It's less of a problem. If anything, it's kind of providing, RCEP is definitely providing, like I said, the frame, the pace that we are actually going to move deeper and deeper into some of these new areas in the near future.
Well, Pak said we have a lot more questions from me and from the public, but unfortunately, we're out of time. And this is a conversation that we can have for hours. I do want to thank you for your time, and I hope that the positive achievements, the good progress that has been reached by ASEAN in the economic sphere will be more known to the people at the grassroots, because they're quite impressive. And I think the world should know that it's not just ASEAN has transformed the region politically and strategically, but the economic story is equally remarkable, and especially the fact that during COVID-19, despite the work from home, ASEAN Secretariat continues to function, very competently and very well. So congratulations, Pak Sad. We will definitely continue this conversation, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Pak Sad.
Thank you.